2024 at UNEP's headquarters in Nairobi, Kenya, under the presidency of the Kingdom of Morocco. And we're very pleased to have His Excellency the Ambassador to the UN here in Geneva with us, representing the presidency. Ladies and gentlemen, the United Nations Environment Assembly is the world's highest level decision-making body on the environment. And the 6 sessions theme is effective, inclusive, and sustainable multilateral actions to tackle climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution, focusing on addressing the interlinkages of the 3 planetary environmental crises. The Assembly will be preceded by what we call the Open-Ended Committee of Permanent Representatives. And this meeting is really a preparatory meeting for negotiating and deliberating on the content, on the wording of the proposed resolutions, declarations, and decisions for subsequent endorsement and approval of the Assembly. The Secretary of the Secretariat of Governing Bodies and Stakeholders, who is also the Director of UNEP's Governance Affairs Office, will be joining us online for this briefing and provide us with an overview of the state of play and what to expect from UNEA 6. Various processes that are also led here in Geneva are contributing to addressing the triple planetary crisis and to actions and measures that will be considered and possibly adopted at UNEA 6. This has also been highlighted in some of the events that Diana and the team from the Geneva Environment Network have been convening throughout this year. And we are also joined for this purpose by various colleagues from UNEP who work, for example, on chemicals and pollutions and resource and markets, to tell us a little bit more about the importance of the UNEA for bringing this work that has, as I said, been also spearheaded here in Geneva to the UNEA, and the importance of strong partnerships and engagements with the wider UN system. But in essence, UNEA is where environmental leadership takes center stage through dialogues among the world's environmental leaders, but also multi-stakeholder dialogues, side events, and associated events which are expected to lay the ground for strengthened global and regional coordinated efforts by UNEP member states and partners to deliver high-impact multilateral actions. While the world is still rebounding from a global pandemic and a difficult geopolitical climate, we live in a world of many crises. Environmental multilateralism has and continues to deliver. From the recognition of the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable development, in July last year, the adoption of a new global biodiversity framework in December last year, the adoption of a new global framework on chemicals in Bonn just a few weeks ago, and to the ongoing negotiations to end plastic pollution and adopt a strong and transformative plastics treaty. I would pose before you that these are moments to celebrate and build upon, but of course, there is much more that needs to be done. And these collective commitments need to be implemented effectively and with clear determination to deliver the intended results for people and the planet. Such determination is also a key deliverable from the recent SDG summit and must guide the actions towards 2030 to reignite progress towards achieving the SDGs. And it is in this spirit that UNEA 6 invites member states to initiate bolder multilateral actions around implementing environmental commitments and addressing new and emerging challenges. UNEA 6 is also expected to provide input to the Summit of the Future, which will take place in September of next year, because the simple fact is that I think we can all agree on that the environment must still be better integrated across the entire multilateral system. And with the increased demand for UNEP support at the country level, the international community must also look at this aspect and possibly consider new and additional resources to really strengthen the implementation of environmental commitments at the national level. UNEA 6 will also shine a light on the importance of the cooperation with multilateral environmental agreements with a view to enhancing its relationship with MEAs. And there will be a dedicated session for MEA engagement at UNEA this time around. And my colleague from the Governance Affairs Office will no doubt tell us a little bit more about that. But I don't tell you also a secret if I tell you that Geneva is a hub for MEAs. We have a number of MEAs that have their secretariats headquartered here. And so it's also a great pleasure that we have one of the representatives of these secretariats here today with us. And of course, this week provides another context for this briefing, and that's COP28 that is just happening in Dubai. And I would think that this adds even more relevance to this briefing. And so let me just repeat again how pleased we are that you could join us for this briefing in the room here in Geneva, in the Environment House, as well as online. And before we hear, as I said, about the state of play for the UNEA from my colleague in the Governance Affairs Office, it is my great pleasure to invite His Excellency Ambassador Omar Tsniber from the permanent representative of Morocco to the UN here in Geneva and representing the UNEA presidency, the Kingdom of Morocco. Ambassador.
Thank you so much, Mr. Director. It's really a pleasure to be with you this morning, all together also with my colleague who is in charge of environmental thematics and issues here in Geneva. I am here just to give a glance about the current Moroccan presidency of the UNEA 6. This is why I would like to thank you, the Geneva Environment Network, and of course the UN Environment Program for organizing this briefing, aiming to provide an update on the preparation of the sixth session of the Environmental Assembly, which will be held in Nairobi, as you said, at the end of next February, which will concur with other major events worldwide the same date, by the way. But environment is of essence, and we should give priority to it, of course, by all means. Let me highlight that the election of Morocco to the presidency of this world highest level decision-making body on environment represents a recognition, we take it like it is, of Morocco's commitment for the international effort to combat climate change and to protect the environment. I may say some few words at the end of this presentation on that, because my duty is just to tell you how much the Moroccan government authorities, all those involved, are really mobilized for such presidency to be a success for all of us. This commitment stems from the wise vision of our leader, His Majesty King Mohammed VI, who is really personally engaged on these matters, personally engaged since a long time, together with his sister, by the way, who is presiding the most important Moroccan foundation, driving our efforts in environmental issues on these matters. So this action, engagement is also realized by this current presidency we are exercising, and also in various programs and sectors which are enabling Morocco now. Just to give you one figure, to reach almost 30% of our electricity consumption by renewables, which is for a developing country as Morocco something to be underlined seriously. Through its presidency, the UNEA Morocco is fully committed to contribute to the mainstreaming and effective integration of the environmental dimension in the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, as you exactly said this morning, Mr. Director. As we all know, our planet is currently facing a triad of environmental problems caused by climate change, pollution, and biodiversity losses. I was yesterday evening in a meeting in connection with the issues we are discussing this morning. And the data provided again are more than to worry us about what's going on. In our globe. All this is requiring an urgent and collective action to mitigate their impacts, avoid the reaching of the threshold of irreversibility, and to ensure a sustainable and habitable future for the generations to come. We are speaking about the future generations as far as I'm personally concerned, in this room particularly. In this regard, the UNEA seeks to be held under the very pertinent thematic of effective, inclusive, and sustainable multilateral actions to tackle climate change, biodiversity, loss, and pollution will provide a center stage of environmental multilateralism and reinvigorate leadership that can deliver timely, effective, and inclusive actions commensurate with the scale and speed of response needed to strengthen the resilience to this triple planetary crisis. In a spirit of continuity and efficiency, Morocco is firmly convinced that the UNIA6 should promote adequate and coherent implementation of the actions and commitments contained in the 14 important resolutions adopted by the UNIA's fifth, including those related to plastic pollution and chemical products and wastes, as well as in the outcome documents of previous sessions of the Environmental Assembly. Also, at this step, I would like to recall that Morocco is strongly engaged on fighting plastic pollution. Here in Geneva, particularly, we are among the countries driving the process within the WTO. With this ministerial declaration, a very important one, given the threats of the pollution by plastic pollution, particularly on the oceans. And also, you referred to, Mr. Director, to this resolution adopted July last year in the General Assembly. Morocco was behind, also with a very small group here, with the countries which formulated the concept of the resolution here in the Human Rights Council, which was an historical step, by the way. For the Moroccan presidency, the UNIA6 outcomes must be bold, time-bound, and ambitious to deliver on the current environmental challenges. The outcomes of the UNIA6 need to represent the current collective thinking of prevailing environmental issues and will be a vital step in the need for action. Recently, during the 10th annual subcommittee meeting held between the 20th and the 26th of November, the President of the UNIA6 has emphasized the importance of an active participation of major groups and stakeholders and their key role in contributing to a successful UNIA6, not only through their contributions, advice, and inputs, but also through the effective implementation of resolutions and decisions to be adopted by the UNIA6. In this regard, Morocco is very grateful to all member states for their valuable inputs on the draft of the ministerial declaration for the UNIA6 and supports an inclusive, open, and transparent process on the development of this ministerial declaration. In this sense, I would like to inform you that the fourth informal consultation of the second draft of the ministerial declaration is planned for tomorrow, 7 December 2023, and will be held in a hybrid format, so accessible, in order to jointly review this second draft and provide concrete comments and inputs paragraph by paragraph. The reading of the second draft will allow for the circulation of a clean, final version of the draft of the ministerial declaration. With this very constructive and inclusive approach on the ministerial declaration, Morocco hopes to conclude the consultations of the draft of the ministerial declaration before the start of the UNIA6. An eventual last consultation could take place during the sixth meeting of the open-ended Committee of Permanent Representatives, which will take place from the 19th to the 23rd February 2024 in Nairobi. To conclude with, Mr. Director, dear audience, I would like to say, of course, that we are all aware of the fact that negotiations are never easy. There may be sometimes some hurdles, some difficulties, but time is of essence. And without a full cooperation of all stakeholders, as I said already, it would be even more difficult. And for us, as developing country, because we are also, having this responsibility in our presidency, we are neutral, we are impartial, we are here to work for the success of the conference. But we have also to voice on behalf of the developing countries which are suffering more than others of the situation, because, and Mr. Director, you raised this issue in your introduction, if we don't, meet our goals, our purpose, the development would become probably more a chimeric aspect than a reality for countries like mine, who are, because there are some studies in the kingdom showing that the loss by environmental deterioration touching our GDP is an average, it's very, very strong and very important. So I leave you with these words. I am very happy to be with you this morning, and also to hear from all others, and to learn more on what we should do as a presidency, to secure the success of the sixth conference. I thank you, Mr. Director.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, and we're really grateful for your leadership and for making time for us today. Next, it is my great pleasure to invite Michel Chiren, the head of the Global Affairs section from the Federal Office for the Environment of Switzerland, to present his welcoming remarks, obviously representing the host country, not only for UNEP's regional office here in Geneva for Europe, but also, as I have said, for the many MEA secretariats that call Geneva home, as well as the international Geneva, as far as also the environment is concerned. We're particularly grateful for the leadership of our host country. Michel, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Arnold, for giving the floor and for your introduction. It's a pleasure to be with you today, Ambassador, colleagues. On behalf of the government of Switzerland, it's my pleasure to welcome you to this event in Geneva and online. And I would like to express from the outset many thanks to the Geneva Environment Network for organizing this event. Arnold, you have said it. The United Nations Environment Assembly is the world's highest level decision-making body on the environment. And member states and stakeholders will come together to discuss action to meet the Sustainable Development Goals. With the UNEA 6 theme, effective, inclusive and sustainable multilateral actions to tackle climate change, biodiversity loss and pollution, the session will focus on addressing the interlinkages of the three planetary environmental crises. With climate change, biodiversity loss and pollution, we face three major environmental crises that have severe impacts and also illustrate, which is also illustrated very well by the intervention by you, Ambassador. And this situation asks for enhanced and well-designed measures to protect the human health and the environment and achieve sustainable development. Environmental multilateralism matters. The last 2 years have delivered significant gains for environmental cooperation. Among them, the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, which was a breakthrough for biodiversity. And then, as a result of the fifth UNEA, a decision to establish a science policy panel on the chemicals, waste and pollution prevention, and also the start of negotiations for an international legally binding instrument to end plastic pollution. Also, the global framework on chemicals to address issues on chemicals and waste. And there are other very important MEA decisions. The planned MEA Day at UNEA highlights the importance of multilateral environmental agreements. The MEAs are a strong foundation and key elements of the international environmental cooperation. They allow us to address challenges that we cannot solve on a national level only. The implementation and evolvement of those agreements is essential to achieve their missions and goals. Director Arnold Kreilhuber rightly also pointed out the fact that several important MEAs are located in Geneva. They interact with other organizations located in Geneva, and Ambassador Neber gave the good example, the WTO, the World Trade Organization, does important work on plastic pollution. And in fact, they are connected in Geneva with the BRS Secretariat and UNEP's Chemicals and Waste branch. We are currently not yet where we want to be and need to be. This international cooperation that we are discussing has to be improved through more effective, inclusive, and networked multilateralism. And UNEA 6 offers the opportunity to initiate decisive multilateral action by providing a platform for decision makers and stakeholders. It is for us to reach global agreement on the most emerging and important environmental issues. We are looking forward to good deliberations and ambitious outcomes of UNEA 6. We look forward to the planned leadership and multi-stakeholder dialogues and side events. And all of this will set the ground for strengthened global and regional coordinated efforts and for setting the course for the future. So thank you very much for the opportunity and for your attention. And back to you, Arnold. Thank you.
We thank you, Michel, for agreeing to join us this morning, and we're very, very grateful for Switzerland's support to UNEP, to all of us here that call Geneva home, as well as for all your efforts to advance the environmental agenda regionally as well as globally. Ladies and gentlemen, as promised, I would now like to invite my colleague Radhika Ocalik, who is the Director of UNEP's Governance Affairs Office, who will join us online, and she will give us an overview of the state of play in terms of the preparations for UNEA and what we can all expect from the sixth session of the UNEA. Radhika, over to you.
Thank you, Arnold. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, colleagues, and good morning. As Arnold said, I'm the Secretary of the governing bodies here at UNEP, and it's a pleasure for me to provide this briefing in preparations for UNEA 6. We are almost 2 months away from UNEA 6. I would also like to thank Arnold and his team and the Environment Network for organizing this briefing. So I would like to go to the next slide. And the next slide. So UNEA, as you may know, is open to all participation of all member states, intergovernmental organizations with observer status with the UN General Assembly and UNEA, UN system entities, MEAs, and major groups and stakeholders that are accredited to UNEP and its governing bodies. Also, you might be aware that the UNEP Executive Director's report to UNEA 6 has been made available on the website, and it focuses on the following topics. 1, implementation of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. 2, advancing integrated approaches for a water-secure world. 3, ensuring responsible mining and sustainable minerals and metals used for the sustainability transitions needed. 4, advancing cooperation around nutrients, especially phosphorus. 5, climate-altering technologies and measures. 6, aligning the financial system for sustainability. And 7, elevating the environment within the multilateral system. Under each of the topic, the Executive Director has suggested recommendations and actions for the consideration of member states. The Executive Director's mandated progress reports on the implementation of previous UNEA resolutions have also been made available on the website. As you might be aware, the Regional Ministerial Environmental Fora, organized by UNEP regional offices, have already taken place in advance of UNEA in Ethiopia, Sri Lanka, Oman, and Panama. Member states had fruitful discussions in all of these regional fora and have identified possible draft proposals for submission to the UN Environment Assembly. In advance of each of these ministerial fora, the major groups and stakeholders also met to prepare for these regional consultations and also to prepare for their input to UNEA. Next slide, please. Just briefly looking at the structure for the 5 days of UNEA. The opening of UNEA will be on Monday at 10 a.m. The Committee of the Whole, once established, will meet from Monday through Wednesday to conclude negotiations on all pending draft proposals. As Arnold already said, an MEA day will be held on Wednesday. The high-level segment will be held on Thursday and Friday. And the high-level segment will include national statements, which will be established based on a list of speakers. To hear the voices of leaders, video messages can be provided by heads of state and government, which will be played during the opening of the high-level segment. Inscription on the list of speakers for the national statements will open in January next year. The high-level segment also includes 3 leadership dialogues and a multi-stakeholder dialogue. Of course, during the closing of the UNEA on Friday afternoon, UNEA will take action on all draft resolutions, decisions, and the draft ministerial declaration, elect its bureau for UNEA 7, and then also adopt its proceedings report and the closure of the session. Next slide, please. So as Arnold said, this is for the first time in UNEA, we will consider an item entitled Cooperation with Multilateral Environment Agreements, and that's on Wednesday, 28th February. The whole day is referred to as the MEA Day. The overall objective of the item is to strengthen the engagement of the MEAs in UNEA to promote coherence between UNEA, UNEP, and the MEAs. Following the opening of the segment, 2 consecutive moderated high-level dialogues will be held on the themes that's shown on the screen. Each dialogue will have a panel discussion followed by an interactive exchange of views. Concept notes with guiding questions will be made available within the end of this month. So by end of the year, we should aim to have the concept notes made available. In addition to the discussions on Wednesday, exhibitions will be organized for the whole week of UNEA 6 to showcase cooperation between UNEP, MEAs, and other entities. MEA-related side events will also be held from Wednesday to Friday in dedicated spaces. Next slide, please. During the high-level segment, we are going to hold 3 leadership dialogues. Dialogue 1 will focus on science, data, and digitalization. Dialogue 2 on finance, and Dialogue 3 on future of environmental multilateralism. Each dialogue will have 2 keynote speakers who will set the scene, followed by a moderated interactive discussion with statements from the floor without an established list of speakers. All concept notes, again, will be made available later this month. Next slide, please. In terms of the major groups and stakeholders engagement, in advance of UNEA, the Children and Youth Major Group is planning to hold a Youth Environment Assembly. A global major groups and stakeholder forum is also planned right before UNEA. And then during the week of UNEA, a multi-stakeholder dialogue will be held on Thursday. All of these events and meetings are organized by the major groups and stakeholders themselves with the support of the Secretariat of UNEP. And then during the week of UNEA, major groups and stakeholders will also have a dedicated space, which is called the Green Room, for their use. Next slide, please. UNEA will include more than 30 official side events, some held in person and some online. We have received an unprecedented number of applications, more than 230. We are going through these applications, and it's hoped that the final list of the official side events will be announced later this month following the review and endorsement by the UNEA Bureau. In the margins of UNEA 6 and the open-ended CPR, a number of related meetings and events will also take place. In this regard, we are pleased to see that the Climate and Clean Air Conference, the International Resource Panel, the 10 YFP Board, and others will be bringing their annual meetings to Nairobi to be held in the margins of UNEA 6 and the open-ended CPR. Next slide, please. In terms of the participation modalities, the UNEA and the CPR Bureau have agreed that UNEA 6 will be held fully in person. Therefore, all formal plenary meetings and informal plenary meetings, such as the high-level dialogues, the leadership dialogues, and the multi-stakeholder dialogues will all be held in person. The formal meetings of the Committee of the Whole, once established, will be also held in person. The meetings will be live streamed on UN Web TV in all the 6 UN official languages. Informal consultations on draft proposals held in the form of contact groups or working groups will be held as hybrid meetings in person and online. The open-ended CPR, as Arnold mentioned, it meets right before UNEA. That will also be held in a hybrid format to allow participation of delegates from capitals who will not be able to travel to Nairobi to join in the negotiations. Next slide, please. Next one. So this slide shows information on the ministerial declaration. I will not go into detail as the ambassador of Morocco has already outlined the expectations of the UNEA president on the ministerial declaration. Just to add that in the spirit of inclusivity, the informal consultations on the draft ministerial declaration is open for participation and attendance by the intergovernmental organizations, UN system representatives, as well as major groups and stakeholders. Next slide, please. So at the 10th annual subcommittee meeting of the CPR, which was held in the week of 20 November, 14 draft resolutions were presented by member states on a range of topics that are projected on the screen. Since the annual subcommittee meeting, 3 other draft resolutions have been announced by delegations. So right now we are looking at 17 draft resolutions that have been announced by member states. Next slide, please. In addition, in consultation with the chair of the CPR, the UNEP Secretariat will provide 3 other proposals, 2 draft decisions on administrative and organizational matters, and 1 draft resolution on the amendment to the JEF instrument. Next slide, please. So as per the guidelines on the submission of draft proposals, which was endorsed by the UNEA and the CPR Bureau, the deadline for the submission of draft resolutions and decision is 18 December. Submission of each draft proposal is to be accompanied by a concept note providing the rationale for the submission. All drafts and concept notes are being made available on a UNEP resolutions portal. Following the submission of a draft, the UNEP Secretariat will prepare a technical note with information such as an initial legal assessment and preliminary budget implications for implementing the draft. Next slide, please. So briefly, this is to show the timelines that we have been working with. The Bureau of the CPR has developed a roadmap for the consultations on the draft resolutions in advance of the open-ended CPR. Meetings of the subcommittee of the CPR in January will be devoted to the introduction of the draft resolutions, followed by a question and answer session on each draft. This will give the proponent or the main sponsor of the draft resolution the opportunity to exchange views with member states and to see if the 0 draft that has been submitted should be revised. Once co-facilitators have been identified and appointed, then the idea is that at the end of January, the co-facilitators will then begin consultations on the draft resolutions. As Arnold had said, the open-ended CPR is the one where the final negotiations on all draft proposals take place. Drafts on which negotiations conclude successfully will be transmitted to the Environment Assembly for adoption. Drafts on which negotiations need to continue will be allocated to the Committee of the Whole for negotiations to be held during the session. Also, just for information, during the open-ended CPR and also during the Committee of the Whole, no more than 2 parallel working groups will be meeting at any given time. Now, some practical information regarding logistical issues. Next slide, please. Registration for UNEA and the open-ended CPR opened on 13 September and it's still ongoing. On-site registration for member states will be determined later, but ideally all participants are to register in advance. Registration is through the Indigo platform, which I'm sure delegates in Geneva are quite well aware of and know the platform very well. Each participant has to register. A composition of delegation is required as part of the registration. The link for member states for the registration was provided through an email. and the link for all other categories of participants is available on the website. We have been informed earlier this week by the representative of Kenya that visa fee will be waived for all the participants who will be coming to Nairobi for UNEA. Travel support will be provided to at least one representative from developing country, with priority given to least developed countries and small island developing states. Subject to the availability of additional funding, we will be able to support a maximum of 2 representatives per developing country. And the deadline for requesting travel support is 20 December. Next slide, please. Lastly, I would like to briefly refer to the budget for UNEA 6. We would like to thank the delegations of Australia, France, Hungary, Morocco, New Zealand, Switzerland, and the European Commission for their generous contributions and pledges towards UNEA 6 to support the participation of representatives from developing countries and stakeholders. The funding gap still remains at $815,000, and we kindly encourage member states who are in a position to do so to contribute to the UNEA budget. Next slide, please. Finally, we invite everyone to visit the UNEA 6 website, which contains all relevant information, and we are updating the website on a regular basis. Information can be found on registration, practical information, resolutions portal, as well as documentation. And we will soon launch a UNEA 6 app, which will provide live program, maps, and push notifications. And next slide, please. And finally, I'd like to thank for this opportunity to provide the briefing. We're here to respond to any questions, and the PowerPoint presentation that we used, if needed, we would be happy to share, and we look forward to welcoming you in Nairobi next year. Thank you. Over to you, Arnold.
Thank you so much, Radhika, for giving us this excellent overview of UNEA 6, the preparations, logistical aspects, and overall what to expect from this very interesting session that we're very much looking forward to. I would propose to you, ladies and gentlemen, that we now jump into some of the key issues that Radhika, but also the speakers before have highlighted, beginning with the novel item for UNEA 6, which is the MEA Day, and honing in and giving a focus to UNEA and its cooperation with MEAs. It has already been mentioned. Geneva is a hub for MEAs. Geneva hosts 5 of the global MEAs that UNEP administers, but of course it also hosts MEAs is home to MEAs that are hosted by other organizations like IUCN or UNECE. And I would like to invite my colleague Monika Stankiewicz, the Executive Secretary of the Minamata Convention on Mercury, to reflect a little bit on what this means for MEAs, what the UNEA means for MEAs. And before I do so, Monika, again, congratulations on a very successful COP5 a few weeks ago. And also, again, happy anniversary to the Minamata Convention. 10 years is a milestone. Monika, over to you.
Thank you so much, and good day, everyone. Ambassador, Excellencies, Arnold, Diana, Jacqueline, all the colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. So indeed, the theme of UNEA 6 is a reminder of the ongoing, you may say, a single planetary crisis that is caused by us, humans, but also it reflects an important role for UNEA to take a holistic approach to addressing the planetary crisis and also to lift the environment on the global agenda. And I would especially like to highlight the second part, because UNEP and UNEA has this special position where they can really help us lifting environmental issues vis-a-vis other issues of global importance. I would like to welcome the UNEA 6 supplementary agenda on multilateral environmental agreements, as well as it will be an opportunity for MEAs, and here I mean parties to MEAs, secretariats to MEAs, and stakeholders engaged in MEAs, to showcase our work, and importantly, it will be an opportunity for MEAs to participate in UNEA considerations on how to further enhance cooperation and coordination to achieve our common goal, and that is to address the environmental crisis the humanity faces. Each of MEAs have their unique mandate and the role to play to contribute to addressing climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution through a concrete set of obligations and commitments parties to these MEAs have undertaken. And this includes several MEAs hosted here in Geneva, so it's Minamata Convention Mercury, Basel, Rotterdam, and Stockholm Conventions on hazardous chemicals and waste, Convention on International Trade of Endangered Species of Flora and Fauna, CITES, and also Ramsar Convention on Wetlands. And there are other important organizations here as well. You may, of course, be aware that MEAs are dynamic processes, so each time the COP meets, there are new obligations and commitments being added. And a good example of it, let me mention my own Minamata Convention Conference of the Parties from a few weeks ago, where parties again agreed to amend annexes to the convention, which, among others, will result in a complete phase-out of fluorescent lamps and a full shift to mercury-free LED lighting, which also have energy-saving gains. And another example is ongoing COP28, ongoing climate change COP, of course. However, MEAs are only successful to the extent to which their provisions are implemented by parties, or to put it other way around, effective implementation of MEAs is a strong foundation of addressing a planetary crisis, as Michel Chiren has mentioned. And UNEA 6 is a key occasion where we can promote implementation of MEAs. MEAs have a long tradition of cooperation among each other and with other UN entities within clusters. So it's a chemical cluster, biodiversity cluster, climate change. But recently, this cooperation coordination also across all MEAs have been initiated and advanced, and demand for such a cooperation across MEAs and organizations for sure is increasing now with the adoption of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework and of the Global Framework for Chemicals. And I see the upcoming UNEA 6 as an excellent opportunity to further add significance and showcase benefits of such a collaboration across, including with UNEP and UNEA, and also for the purpose of quick starting implementation of these two new agreements. And this approach is already fully supported by parties to MEAs. And again, let me give you an example of Minamata Convention where parties adopted a decision on mercury and Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, so standalone decision with a number of points, including a mandate for the Secretariat to further work on the substance, on the concrete content of the both agreements, to support national level work to have an integrated approach to those agreements, but also encouraging parties to look into possibilities to integrate mercury action into the projects developed under JEF in the area of biodiversity and other focal areas and integrated programs. I attended a side event organized by Minamata Convention, BRS Convention, and UNEP at the Climate Change COP last Friday, which was on decarbonization and detoxification and linkages and opportunities for synergetic action. And at that side event, there were some countries presenting their national work, how they develop policies to integrate the obligation for multiple MEAs, which were excellent examples. And I'm looking forward to UNEA 6 to further promote such an integrated approach to national implementation. And also, of course, UNEA 6 will result in adoption of a set of resolutions. And I trust the member states of UNEA, who are also parties to MEAs, will seek coherence between UNEA resolutions and decisions of MEAs governing bodies to advance environmental agenda. And as in the past, the Minamata Convention will engage in future implementation of these new resolutions as appropriate. And I'm sure other MEAs will do so as well. And we did it so in the past, and give me one example of an important resolution 5/12 on environmental aspects of minerals and metals management, where Secretariat of our conventions has engaged to inform on the progress we are achieving towards regulating mercury use and waste stream management in artisanal and small-scale gold mining. And lastly, Ambassador, you mentioned the importance of inclusiveness and inclusive participation of stakeholders. I think UNEA really shines here and is an example of such an inclusive engagement. Such work can never stop, and I believe we within MEAs also do our part, but we can also learn from each other how to ensure that each important group of stakeholders is meaningfully engaged in decision-making processes. So to conclude, let me say that MEAs, including secretariats, are ready to engage and contribute to UNEA 6, including during the dialogue session that is to be held on Wednesday during UNEA week. And this is based on the recent considerations of our parties at the conferences of the parties where such supplementary agenda has been welcomed. So I'm really looking forward to meeting you all in February in basically a few months' time. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Monica, for these messages about collaboration, cooperation, and I think opportunities that this new supplementary agenda item for UNEA presents for you and other colleagues, managing and leading MEA secretariats. Jacqueline Alvarez, sitting to my left, is the chief of UNEP's Chemicals and Health branch. Elisa Tonda, on the other side of the table, is the chief of the Resources and Markets branch of UNEP. And you have already heard from Radhika some of the thematic issues that are proposed either by UNEP's executive director in her report to UNEA or by member states in terms of proposed resolutions for UNEA 6. But we have all spoken also about the importance of International Geneva in terms of inspiring and leading some of the processes that are eventually taken up at UNEA, but also I think it could be a good opportunity, Jacqueline and Elisa, if all roads lead to Nairobi, to the UNEA, to also reflect a little bit on the importance of what it means for your work, especially what governments decided to UNEA, what is the importance of UNEA resolutions for your work in terms of taking some of these important issues forward. Jacqueline, can we start with you? 5 minutes, please. Not more.
Well, that's a challenge. First challenge of the day. Yes, good afternoon or good day and good morning to all of you here. Thank you, Ambassador, for being with us today, and of course for Morocco for taking this very important leadership role for our assembly. So we are at home, that is what we heard. And yes, it's a fact, we are at home, but also we need to see the world as our home in all the discussions that we are doing. The UNEA that is in front of us is a very big UNEA. We have to embrace the opportunity for sure. So I will maybe start by referring a little to the chemicals and pollution aspects, which doesn't sound always fancy because pollution is something we don't like to hear, or chemicals, sometimes we don't really understand the potential that the chemicals agenda offers for solutions, for climate, for example, for medicine, but also for, in a way, reverting some of the actions that we have already been doing. A big momentum was created, and I keep on counting the weeks. 9 weeks ago in Bonn, in Germany, for the first time, a global framework on chemicals was adopted, and it is bringing not only a very important opportunity for the chemicals agenda, as the name is saying, but it's opening and connecting the dots with our economies, with the jobs that we need to create or the jobs that we need to change and how they are going and moving, with our financial flows. And we always look at chemicals sometimes from the perspective of the waste that they generate or from the perspective of the harm that they bring, but we also need to link and scale up the finance that are related to these things. So this framework is providing that space, that opportunity to really touch upon all the different elements that make the agenda. Why I'm saying this? Because also 9 weeks ago, we heard again, and I will give you some numbers for lead, this heavy metal that is very nice for fishing and for the batteries in the cars. Today, we have in our blood systems and in our blood 8 to 10 times more lead than 10 years ago. How come? We know the science for how many decades, centuries, and we still are not being able to tackle that. You will have in front of you at UNEA reports, one on issues of concern. Heavy metals is coming as one of those. And I mentioned lead, but I can mention cadmium. In 2019, 2.3 million died because of cadmium. Can you imagine? Then I will relate it to maybe NO2, right? Climate pollutant. Do you know how many people died in 2019? 1.8 million. So they are numbers that are very, very close, but sometimes we tend to disregard these facts. So you will have in front of you knowledge products for UNEA for decision making, one on issues of concern that brings in heavy metals, that brings in EDCs, endocrine disrupting chemicals, that brings in antimicrobial resistance, plastics, additives in plastics. And I'm looking at Elisa because we are having a very important discussion on, in a way, what makes sense in this arena as well. Let's talk about finance. $10.3 trillion US lost, direct costs or indirect, also because of lead. Can you imagine? If I start putting the zeros, it's just like a never-ending trillion zeros. We need to address this agenda urgently. Science, and Michelle from Switzerland, thank you for highlighting the science policy panel, but we also need to think a lot more on the interface that connects the science with the decision making. UNEA is that opportunity. It's the opportunity that you member states have in front of you to really change the paradigm. We have known things for a very long time. Well, what will be the trigger for change? That's a big question. And you will also have in front of you some resolutions. I will mention some of them, not all, that are related to this agenda, but again, not all of them. You will have an air pollution resolution that it's coming. You will have one on chemicals and waste. You will have the part of the waste component in a circularity resolution that's coming as well. Connect the dots. That's one of the biggest always messages for all of us. If you are in a country, you don't address only a climate pollutant or dioxins and furans coming from BRS or mercury coming from Minamata. So we need to think really in a holistic manner, but going into the details of what it is needed for us to change. I'll use again some words that I heard today on the stakeholders. And yes, thank you very much, Ambassador and Monica, for bringing that aspect. This is not something that only one sector can deal with. We really need to scale up and connect. And the last part to finalize my extended 5 minutes. UNEA 6, yes, it offers a decisive multilateral platform. It's really time to act. It's really time to connect. And we are, as UNEP, in your hands. But most importantly, the world is in your hands.
Thank you so much, Jacqueline. Elisa.
Good day to everybody, and thank you very much, Ambassador, for being with us today. And I hope I'll be granted the extended 5 minutes that Jacqueline was granted, because it's really very nice to be able to reflect with all of you on a process that has seen really Geneva as a bit of the protagonist from the beginning to the end, which has already been alluded to. It builds on UNEA 5 and Resolution 12 that looks into environmental aspects of mining and metals, a process that is also underpinning one of the 6 axes that my colleague Radhika was alluding to in terms of the content of the executive director report, of those axes that can propel more effective, inclusive, and sustainable multilateral action. So Radhika was referring to it as what we would need to do to ensure more responsible mining and more sustainable use of minerals and metals. And we have been reflecting with all of you during the past year on that specific issue in the context of a set of regional intergovernmental consultations that have actually started in April here in Geneva with the Eastern European region and have gone throughout the world until July of this year and have had its concluding moment again here in Geneva at the beginning of September with the global intergovernmental consultations where we discussed on 24, the resolution called them non-prescriptive proposals. They were really ideas that were put on the table by member states, also building on the discussion of multiple stakeholders that have been extremely active throughout the process on what we can do to ensure a more sustainable management of minerals and metals. And out of the discussions that took place here in Geneva, there were 5 of them that were really coming out as very strong elements, where many were coming across as areas where it was felt that the community around the table and UNEP, as well as the other intergovernmental organizations that joined the process, could really make a difference. One of the areas that was flagged as a priority was to undertake a global assessment of the existing standards, certifications, frameworks that speak to sustainability of minerals and metals. Another one that was really felt as a strong area of convergence was around the management of sand, and particularly the role of a global observatory on the use of sand. An element that was actually built throughout the process are contact point for continuous conversation with member states. And it actually was the result of appointing national focal points that have been following this process. And we could celebrate by the global consultation that actually 120 member states had appointed focal point, which was an impressive result in terms of really hearing the perspectives, the view, and the proposals that emerged from this broad group. And in the context of our global consultation, there was a call to try and think how this could be, how may I say, institutionalized so that the dialogue with these focal points could continue over time. Another priority that emerged very systematically is one around capacity building, technical assistance, and technology transfer. And last but not least, recognizing that there's a lot that is already happening on this agenda and a strong call for international cooperation. And that's where I'm also very keen to thank all the secretariats of multilateral environmental agreements that have been following us throughout the project. And Monica, your team has been stellar in holding the hand with us and preparing very solid information that was the background for all the discussions that we undertook during the past year. And again, as Radhika alluded to, the governments of Senegal and of Switzerland have already announced that a resolution will be tabled to take forward that work and to build on what has been the regional and global process of consultations. I also wanted to put on the table something that I feel we have been working a lot with the Geneva community, though I'm not sure we have been having the opportunity to go in depth on that. But Jacqueline alluded to that. There is also a conversation and a resolution put on the table on circular economy transitions that speak to how different sectors, not only the mining and metal sector, but other sector would transform themselves to address the triple planetary crisis and how collaboration around that transition would look like. And what is very true is that with a lot of the members in the community in Geneva, we're actually very actively working on that subject. And as announced currently in the concept note that already exists for this resolution, there is indeed, as Jacqueline was mentioning, a reference to what would be required in terms of stepping up efforts on the environmentally sound management of waste. It also is intended to look into some specific sectors that build on the work that has been done in earlier resolution on this subject. So the mobility sector, particularly with the end-of-use vehicles, but also the textile sector. And there is a call for more international cooperation to ensure progress around SDG 12. One of the elements of the resolution allows me to refer to the science base also of our work on circular economy and sustainable consumption and production, and use the opportunity to reflect on the fact that UNEA 6 will also be the moment in time when the Global Resources Outlook 2024 that has been developed by the community of experts of the International Resource Panel will be launched, and hopefully will be the basis for a number of reflections. So I'll stop here. I know I've probably been going a bit extended. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Elisa. And again, also to Jacqueline for, I think, providing to us the importance that International Geneva has in connecting the dots, in collaborating and manifesting, as well as realizing, as you have said, Jacqueline, that urgency that I think should drive all of us in terms of addressing some of the environmental problems that we face. Many of you have mentioned, or I think all of you have mentioned, the role of major groups and stakeholders in terms of enriching UNEA, but also helping us to develop the solution that really matter for people and the planet. And we're very fortunate to have with us here today Patricia Heidegger, the Deputy Secretary General and Director for EU Governance, Sustainability and Global Policies from the European Environmental Bureau. And she will speak to us about the importance that UNEA has from the perspective of major groups and other stakeholders. And this comes right on the back of last week's last regional preparatory meeting for UNEA 12. And Patricia is also one of the 12 regional facilitators of major groups and stakeholders for the UNEP regions. Patricia, over to you. The floor is yours.
Yes, thank you so much. Good morning to everyone. So yeah, I'm Patricia, and I'm indeed one of the 2 elected facilitators in the European region, together with my colleague Natasha from North Macedonia. And yeah, our preparations for UNEA 6 are indeed in full swing, and I'd like to thank the Geneva Environment Network for the invitation to speak to you today and give you a short overview of some of the ideas that we have for UNEA 6. We had the opportunity already back in July to have a first in-person stakeholder consultation in Rabat during the retreat of the bureaus, and the opportunity to engage directly with the UNEA 6 bureau there, thanks to the UNEA president. And since then, all the regions have held their regional consultation meetings. We've also been engaging in the 10th annual subcommittee meeting 2 weeks ago, where we've been providing ideas and input. So yeah, as has been mentioned, we had the chance to organize our regional consultation meeting last week in Bratislava with support from UNEP, and also hosted by the Slovak Environment Ministry. And I'd like to thank again the UNEA 6 Vice President Norbert Kurilla from Slovakia for making a lot of time for us and the ministry for their kind support. So we're about to finalize our Bratislava joint regional statement with a lot of ideas and inputs on all of the draft resolutions that had been known, that were known to us last week, that member states have announced. And I hope you will be able to study that with interest once we're ready to share it. So I just wanted to feed into some of the topics that have already been talked about today, linking back to what the stakeholders discussed last week. We did have participants from more than 30 countries in the region and 7 out of the 9 major groups. So I would say quite a representative sample of stakeholders in the region. So we did discuss quite a bit about the topic of sound management of chemicals and waste, which some of you have mentioned today, and we welcome the Swiss initiative to keep this topic on the UNEA agenda. as we remain extremely concerned about exposure to hazardous chemicals such as forever chemicals and endocrine disrupting chemicals and microplastics. And we encourage you to work on the rapid implementation of the new global chemicals framework that we've heard about today, and to advance the phase out of forever chemicals at global level, and to advance towards mandatory disclosure of information on the chemical composition of manufactured materials and products at global level. Some of us are also very closely following the development of the dedicated science policy panel. There are some concerns around it being truly independent, and we hope that we can all make sure together that there is no conflict of interest in this science policy panel from the side of kind of industry involvement. What we also discussed in quite some depth, because it's a new topic to many of us, is linked to another Swiss initiative linked to the draft resolution on solar radiation modification, which has drawn a lot of interest from stakeholder groups. We also did some capacity building on this topic, given that some of the technologies like stratospheric aerosol injection are not necessarily known to a lot of people. But we also came to the conclusion that these technologies come with enormous risk, as for instance, stratospheric injections would have to be continued for hundreds, if not thousands of years to stop triggering a so-called termination shock, where temperatures the temperature on Earth would suddenly rise if we stopped such technologies. And there's also advice from the advisory committee to the UN Human Rights Council saying that solar geoengineering technologies are some of the most extreme and existentially threatening technology ever conceived by humankind. So mankind. So we therefore call on you, when you're working on this resolution, to support the call for a non-use agreement on solar engineering, which is already supported by hundreds of experts and academics, and to strengthen the existing moratorium on geoengineering under the CBD in moving forward in this resolution. You've also mentioned, Elisa, the work on mining metals and minerals, and we welcome the renewed Swiss initiative to continue the work on this topic. We encourage member states to look at the topic of raw materials and resources, not only from the perspective of how we can reduce the negative social environmental impact of mining, but really from a systems change approach, how we can actually minimize mining or the opening of new mines as far as possible, and to focus on secondary material use and solutions that focus on demand side reduction of virgin raw materials. For instance, by looking into things such as consumption corridors, in particular for those countries that have the highest per capita and total material consumption rates. We believe that on the medium to long term, we will need an international treaty to ensure global governance of raw materials, to ensure the equitable and sustainable use of the world's resources, including a definition of material use reduction targets, such as we already have for CO2 emissions. Then we also see with a lot of support that the European Union is working on 2 resolutions on circular economy and on water policy. Stakeholders are very excited to engage in the discussion on a comprehensive approach to water management. And we're also excited to work more, not a new topic to UNEA, on circular economy, for instance, to advance international regulation and standards for product policy, eco-design, and sustainable materials. And finally, we'd also like to welcome the initiative from the Ukrainian government for a resolution on the environmental impact of armed conflict. It is with some disappointment that we have seen that the second draft of the ministerial declaration in its current version does not address or speak about the effects of conflict and military activities on global climate and environment and development challenges, at a time where the devastating impact of war is not only contributing to serious pollution hotspots and the loss of valuable natural areas, but it's actually setting back countries and whole regions on their path to carbon neutrality, zero pollution, and restored nature. So we hope that we can get your support to support UNEP in working on the environmental dimension of armed conflict, also with increased funds for assistance, for comprehensive assessments of the long-term impact on health and environment, and the costs of war, ongoing wars and past conflicts. So I leave it there, and I hope that you will have some time to look at our joint regional statement, where we will have positions and ideas on all of the resolutions that were announced 2 weeks ago. And we will also reach out to some of the governments who have announced draft resolutions to continue the dialogue with you. We hope that we are able to engage with you through the upcoming rounds of international stakeholder consultations, the global major groups and stakeholder forum that was mentioned during the week of the open-ended CPR, and throughout the whole UNEA 6 process. So thank you a lot for your attention, and we're looking forward to continuing the dialogue.
Thank you very much, Patricia, for sharing these outcomes from your regional consultations with us, which will no doubt be very important and listen to input for UNEA 6. Ambassador, thank you very much for joining us. Ambassador has to leave us now, and I'm also informed Michel Chiren has to leave us. But we have time for some questions and answers now. I would propose that we maybe start with a question from the room, if there is one. If anybody in the room has a question. I don't see anybody. Then let me see who had asked a question online. There were a couple of questions from Ilzinka Ulatovska to all panelists. How specifically will major groups and stakeholders be involved in decision-making processes? I think this was also a question specifically, Monica, I think related to MEA, so perhaps not only UNEA, but maybe I'll start out with Radhika, and then I would invite panelists here in the room who wants to come in. Radhika.
Thank you, Arnold. So a lot of information was already provided by Patricia, but of course, major groups and stakeholders will be able to be in the room during the open-ended CPR, where negotiations of draft resolutions are taking place. We have received a request from member states during the annual subcommittee that once the co-facilitators have been identified and appointed, they have a consultation with major groups and stakeholders on all draft resolutions and decisions that have been submitted in advance of the open-ended CPR. So we will work with the Bureau of the CPR as well as the co-facilitators to arrange for that. We would have major groups and stakeholders will be able to participate during the interactive session of all of the MEA dialogues, leadership dialogues, as well as their own multi-stakeholder dialogue. During UNEA, there's also, as I said before, the negotiations will be open for participation of all stakeholders, and they should be able to speak when the negotiations happen, when the floor is open for discussion. Also, the national statements that will be during the high-level week, major groups and stakeholders will have an opportunity to speak, and we are working with the Secretariat of the Civil Society Office in Governance Affairs to also have major group and stakeholders speak at the opening of UNEA. So with that, over to you, Arnold. Thank you.
Many, many thanks, Radhika. Monica, would you like to complement?
Yes, thank you. And this is, of course, a very broad topic, but just give me, let me give you one example again from the Minamata Convention Conference of the Parties, where upon parties' own initiative, there was a proposal for a decision put forward, which was adopted on effects of mercury on indigenous people and on local communities. And in that decision, parties agreed to broaden participation of indigenous peoples, local communities, and other stakeholders in projects and programs under the Minamata Convention. And that, of course, opens up for more work to ensure, as I mentioned, meaningful participation. So we would like to stakeholders to attend with the intention of them making contribution then is then considered, and that they are part and they are sitting at the table. So I would say for indigenous people in chemicals cluster, this is a novelty, and I hope others will follow the suit. But this is just one example of one group, but there are, of course, many more. Thank you.
Thank you, Monica. Jacqueline, Elisa? Jacqueline wants to add, please.
Yes, and one of the maybe particularities of this global framework on chemicals that was adopted 9 weeks ago is its multi-stakeholder and multi-sectoral character, meaning that in decision-making, all of the representatives, the people, the stakeholders that are sitting in the room has the potential to join the decision-making. For example, there is no order. First, for example, member states and then certain groups is a first come, first serve type of approach. And of course, there are certain subtleties. At the end of the day, the final decision making comes from member states, but the discussion and the dialogue is promoted in an open and transparent manner. And they can influence directly and provide text and input to resolutions, provide information documents, provide meeting documents as well. So I think that in this cluster is a unique situation, and it was just adopted as a successor of the former SAICM, meaning that we have been working in this modality for over 20 years, no, 18 years right now. Thank you.
Many thanks, Jacqueline. Yes, Elisa.
I feel that there's also the process that has been taken as to UNEA that is important to reflect on. And in this context, I would really want to commend the work that have been done by the co-chairs of the intergovernmental consultations on mining and metal that have been the government of Pakistan and the government of Switzerland. Because while the resolution was given as a very clear setting within which the intergovernmental process had to materialize, meaning that the discussion was led by governments with other stakeholders as observers, what was done in a systematic way was that in advance to those intergovernmental consultation, a workshop setting was organized in such a way that delegates at the national focal point had the opportunity to hear, interact, discuss with the different stakeholders, understand where the science is currently, where industry is currently, where indigenous communities are currently, where local communities are currently, so that all perspectives could then be reflected on and brought into the intergovernmental consultation setting. And these happened throughout the process, which was a very good opportunity to really create an open and transparent exchange. And this is indeed what is reflected and what comes in the co-chair summary, which is one of the information document for UNEA 6.
Thank you very much, Elisa. We have another question from Peter Nalanda posted online. And Jacqueline, maybe I could start with you on this one. Peter picked up on the cooperation aspect, and he's wondering whether there should not be a dedicated session that brings together stakeholders who deal with data and science to discuss an integrated approach that makes data and science effectively contribute to addressing the environment crisis we all face.
Okay. So for UNEA, maybe Radhika is in a best position to answer formally the question. What I can say always is that we are open to having that type of discussions. And next week, during the open-ended working group meeting for establishing the science policy panel, this type of discussions are coming very, very strongly, particularly because data needs is on top, but also the management of that data and the implications and the impact of that data. So within the process of the science policy panel, that it is happening somehow, but it, of course, it can be strengthened during the process and happy to further discuss if you see any opportunities for having, not in the formal setting, but informal consultations at UNEA as well. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jacqueline. Radhika, any input on this from you? Jacqueline already mentioned the science policy panel.
Thank you, Arnold. So, of course, we have the leadership dialogue that's taking place on this at data, science, data, and digitalization. So that would be an opportunity for discussion on this topic. And as Jacqueline said, we have the Science Policy Business Forum. We're still looking at the concept note and details of how the Science Policy Business Forum can be organized, but that will be another venue. And of course, there might be other side events that will be held, including side events in the context of the MEA Day and the MEA organized side events, plus the official side events of UNEA. So we'll see what the final list of side events that's approved by the Bureau will include, but that could be another venue for the discussion on this issue. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Radhika. I think what you both have highlighted is that this bringing together of data and science around effective policy making has been a part of UNEA already, as well as of international processes. Jacqueline, you mentioned the upcoming negotiations on the science policy panel. Any other panelists wants to come in on this? Elisa?
Maybe I'm just going to repeat myself, but the global resources outlook will be very much around data on sustainable use of resources. And because of the International Resource Panel meeting happening back-to-back to UNEA 6, we will also count on the presence of all those scientists that are behind that report. And hopefully that will be also a very inspiring opportunity of exchange with member states on the opportunity of really relying on data in the decision-making process that speaks to patterns of consumption and production.
Many thanks, Elisa. Very important addition. Yes, we have a question in the room. If you could introduce yourself, please.
I'm Peter Lunenborg. I'm a senior program officer here in this building with the South Center. Also actually triggered by SDG 12, sustainable use and production, right? Consumption and production. I recently did a study on assessing the progress of the SDGs by LDCs on the SDGs. And then if you look at SDGs, you know, they are measured by a global framework, you know, a global indicator framework. And SDG 12.2 actually is measured if you export more raw material, you actually can meet the target because your national use and your national consumption is lower if you export more, which I find a little bit surprising. So actually, if you look at LDCs, they actually made progress on that indicator, not because they are more efficient, you know, consumers, but probably because they have exported more since the adoption of the SDGs. You know, they've exported more raw materials. So, you know, if we talk about data and if we talk about the global goals, of course, we have, you know, all the sectoral frameworks, but of course, we start with the SDGs. So maybe this is something that to be looked at because I find an indicator that more exports over raw material means you have more sustainable consumption and production. I think it's a bit counterintuitive. So,
any specific proposal for UNEA to take this up? Or how?
Well, that's a good question. So actually, there is a review of the indicator framework. The 2025 is called 2025 review. That's a process that's starting in the Statistical Commission. I think from the UNEP side, it is actually a way of saying how can we refine the indicators for SDG 12, for example, for the environment related SDGs. So I think this is something that can be looked at and maybe can propose as a mandate for, let's say, UNEP to provide input in that process. So that could be one way, one entry point.
Yeah, thank you very much. Let me see if any of the panelists wants to come in here. It was more a suggestion and then an observation. And while the panelists reflect whether they want to come in or not, we have only a couple minutes to go. And after reactions to this comment, I would like to invite Radhika perhaps to very briefly repeat the registration process and what member states and stakeholders can do if they run into any difficulties with regards to the registration process, because I see there were some comments provided online from participants of this session who would like a repetition of this information. So let me see, Elisa, please.
Thank you very much, Arnold, and thank you for the question. It's indeed counterintuitive, and I expect this to be probably loophole, if there's any, of the material flow accounting framework, which is the basis through which SDG 12.2 indicator is calculated. And it's actually also the database that it's at the basis of all the work of the International Resource Panel. And it's at the basis of the Sustainable Consumption and Production Hotspot Assessment tool. So I would be very keen to look into the specific case, and I would be very surprised if that's the message that it conveys. Wande, would you want to come in as well?
Actually, 12.2.2 talks about material consumption per capita. So that may be the problem. But the second one on stakeholders, I just quickly, in terms of the executive director's report and engagement of stakeholders, the very first proposal on the global biodiversity framework is actually focusing, the heart of that is how do we engage indigenous communities and indigenous people and local communities into the implementation of the GBF. So there's a huge space in terms of participation.
Great, thank you very much, Elisa and Wande. And Wande, we have not introduced you properly. Wande works in the Europe office of UNEP and is the focal point for UNEA in the Europe office. Thanks for that addition, Wande. Ladies and gentlemen, we are about to close, but before I would, as promised, give Radhika the floor to very briefly repeat to us the registration process and what one could do if one runs into problems in registering for UNEA. Radhika.
Thank you, Arnold. So registration for member states, information is on the website, but the link for registration was sent to the CPR members and the environmental focal points that we have in our directory. The link was sent by an email. So the link for member states is not on the website. It was circulated through an email. Registration for intergovernmental organizations who have observer status with the UN General Assembly and with UNEA, the registration link is provided on the website under the tab registration. So participate, and then there is a drop down for register. Similarly, the link for UN system entities, it's already provided on the website. And for accredited major group and stakeholders, NGOs, civil society, it's also provided on the website. So you would have to go to click on the link that takes you to the relevant page on the Indigo portal. And then you have to create your username and password if you don't have that to then be able to register. And then there are a set of documentation that you have to upload. For instance, for member states, they need to upload the composition of delegation to be able to, for UNEP Secretariat to approve your registration. And similarly, for other categories of participant, we will need a formal communication from the head of the organization with the composition of the delegation for us to then approve the registration. Over to you, Arnold.
Many thanks, Radhika. And ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, this concludes this briefing. I want to thank all the panelists for their wonderful interventions, and also to you all for participating and engaging in this briefing. Thank you very much for making the time. And I hope you will stay continuously engaged in the UNEA process, and see you all at UNEA 6. Thank you very much.